My name is Natalie Brooks, and I never imagined that the hardest day of my life wouldn't be my grandfather's funeral. It would be the moment my own parents proved that, to them, I had always come second. Grandpa William Brooks wasn't just my grandfather. He was the one person who believed in me when no one else did. While my younger brother Ethan skipped family dinners and only visited Grandpa when he needed money, I spent every Saturday helping him around his old farmhouse. We'd drink coffee on the porch, fix broken fences, and talk for hours about life, business, and the importance of earning respect instead of demanding it. He often told me, "Natalie, money doesn't build character, it reveals it." At the time, I thought it was just another one of his life lessons. I had no idea he was preparing me for what was coming. A week after the funeral, our family gathered in the lawyer's office for the reading of Grandpa's will. My parents looked surprisingly cheerful while Ethan sat confidently in an expensive suit, already acting like he'd won the lottery. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. "To my grandson, Ethan Brooks, I leave $500,000. My mother gasped with excitement before the sentence was even finished. Dad slapped Ethan on the shoulder and proudly said, "That's my boy." No one looked at me, not even once. The lawyer continued reading. "To my granddaughter, Natalie Brooks." I held my breath. "I leave my deepest gratitude for your kindness." That was it, no money, no property, nothing. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't make a scene. Ethan has a wife and a baby, you can take care of yourself." Her words hurt far more than losing the inheritance. I forced a smile, congratulated my brother, and quietly stood up to leave. Just as I reached the office door, I heard the lawyer call my name. "Natalie, your grandfather asked me to speak with you privately." I stopped. Behind me, my parents exchanged confused looks. I turned around, completely unaware that my grandfather had one final surprise waiting. And it would change every one of our lives forever. The lawyer waited until my parents and Ethan walked into the hallway before closing the office door. He opened a locked drawer and carefully placed a small wooden box on the desk. "Been instructed to give this to you only after everyone else leaves," he said. Inside the box was an old brass key, a folded letter, and a faded photograph of my grandfather standing in front of a brick warehouse I had never seen before. I unfolded the letter with shaking hands. "Dear Natalie, if you're reading this, then everything happened exactly as I expected. Your parents believe an inheritance is measured in dollars. They always have. That's why I let them celebrate today." My heart started pounding. "The real inheritance isn't listed in my will." The key. "Go to the address written on the back of the photograph. Trust no one until you've spoken with my attorney." I looked at the lawyer. "What does this mean?" He smiled politely. "I promised your grandfather I wouldn't explain anything until you saw it with your own eyes." The next morning, I drove nearly 2 hours to a quiet industrial district outside the city. The address led me to the same brick warehouse from the photograph. It looked abandoned. Dust covered the windows and the paint had faded years ago. I wondered if I'd come all this way for nothing. Then I noticed the old lock. The brass key fit perfectly. The heavy door creaked open. Inside wasn't an empty warehouse. It was a fully functioning storage facility filled with carefully organized crates, antique furniture, artwork, and rows of filing cabinets. An older man walked toward me. "You must be Natalie." He introduced himself as Mr. Harris, Grandpa's business partner for more than 30 years. "Been waiting for this day." He led me into a private office where dozens of folders covered the desk. One by one, he opened them. The first contained ownership papers, the second held stock certificates, the third listed rental properties across 3 states. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. "This can't be real." Mr. Harris nodded. "It is. 25 years, your grandfather quietly built an investment company. Never told the family because he wanted to know who loved him, and who loved his money." Then he slid one final document across the desk. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Sole owner, Natalie Brooks." I could barely breathe. Mr. Harris looked at me and smiled. "Natalie, we're just getting started." I stared at the document for what felt like forever. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered. Mr. Harris shook his head. "Isn't." He opened a leather binder filled with financial reports. "Your grandfather started this business with a single warehouse over 30 years ago. Over time, he invested in commercial real estate, logistics companies, and dividend-paying stocks. He kept everything private." I slowly turned the pages. Every document carried my grandfather's signature. The final page carried mine. "What is this?" I asked. "A transfer agreement," Mr. Harris replied. 3 years ago, your grandfather legally transferred ownership to you through a trust. He wanted to make sure no one could challenge his decision after he was gone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, how much is all of this worth?" Mr. Harris smiled. "As of this morning, just over $28 million. I covered my mouth. $28 million. While my family had been celebrating a $500,000 inheritance, Grandpa had quietly trusted me with an entire business empire. Then Mr. Harris handed me one last envelope. "It's the final letter." I unfolded it carefully. Natalie, if you've reached this point, then you've already discovered the truth. Your brother wanted what I could give him. Your parents cared about what I could leave behind. You came to see me even when I had nothing to offer except stories, coffee, and old memories. That is why you earned everything I spent my life building. Tears rolled down my face. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt seen. A week later, the news became public. Business magazines reported the change in ownership. Local newspapers called me the unexpected heir to the Brooks Holdings Group. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Then my mother called. "Natalie, why didn't you tell us?" Before I could answer, Dad got on the line. "We're family. We should celebrate this together." A few hours later, Ethan showed up at my apartment carrying flowers and an apology. "No, I haven't been the best brother," he said quietly. "Can we start over?" I looked at all three of them standing at my door for the first time in my life. They weren't looking at me, they were looking at what I owned. I looked at my parents and Ethan for a long moment, a year earlier. They would have walked past my apartment without a second glance. Now they stood at my door carrying flowers, homemade pie, and forced smiles. Mom reached for my hand. "We've been thinking a lot," she said softly. "Maybe we haven't always treated you fairly." Dad quickly nodded. "We're still a family, Natalie. Money shouldn't come between us." I almost laughed. Money hadn't come between us, their choices had. I invited them inside, poured everyone a cup of coffee, and let the silence settle over the room. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I'd like to work with you. I know I made mistakes, but I want us to be close again." Looked at him. "Do you remember Grandpa's birthday 3 years ago?" He frowned. "No, you cancelled because your friends invited you to a football game." He looked down. I turned to my parents. "Do you remember Christmas when Grandpa spent the entire evening waiting for someone to visit him?" Neither of them answered. "I was there," I continued. "We watched old movies, ate frozen pizza, and laughed until midnight. He didn't care about expensive gifts, he just wanted his family." Room became painfully quiet, then I placed Grandpa's final letter on the table. Read this letter 100 times. It reminds me that an inheritance isn't a reward for being related to someone. It's the result of the life you choose to live. Mom began to cry. Dad whispered, "We're sorry." The first time in years I believed they meant it. But forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. "Forgive you," I said calmly, "but I'm not giving away what Grandpa trusted me to protect." I stood and walked them to the front door. Before leaving, Ethan turned around. "Guess Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing." I smiled. He did. After they left, I drove to Grandpa's farmhouse. I sat on the old porch where we had spent so many Saturdays together. The evening breeze carried the same peaceful silence we had always shared. I looked at the sunset and quietly said, "You were right, Grandpa. Money really does reveal character." The first time since losing him, I wasn't thinking about what he had left me. I was thinking about everything he had taught me, and I realized. His greatest inheritance had never been the millions. It was the wisdom to know who truly deserved them.